Welcome back to the Virtual Piano Video Course, lesson number 5. In this lesson, we will be discussing some of the basics of music theory. When you're talking about music theory, you're talking about the basic way that music works. For this class, it is open for beginners, intermediate, and even advanced level. And in this class, by no means is the information in this chapter the totality of all knowledge in relating to music theory. But we just want to touch very briefly on a few key ideas and to give you some general basic information as you learn and grow. There are books, there are classes, even private instruction, and musical schools that you can go to that will give you a total in-depth study of the area of music theory. But for this class, we just want to introduce you to some key ideas and some key words that we're speaking of as it relates to music theory. So let's get started. The first idea that we're going to talk about today is pitch. Well, you might ask, what is pitch? Pitch is the frequency of a sound. When you're talking about frequency, I'm not talking about how much or how many in terms of measure. We're talking about a sound vibration, the frequency of the sound, which means the level of the sound that you hear. Now, pitch actually will lead you into tones, and the higher the pitch is, the more vibration of sound that it takes to create a tone, and then there will be pitches at different levels and different intervals. I'm going to play you an example of an actual tone that will give you an idea of what we're talking about when we're saying pitch. So let's listen. So in that example, what we heard was just one tone. And as you can hear, the sound gives you a fundamental frequency of a note. And you hear a sound in regards to that frequency of sound. When you have frequency of sound that results in a note, that's what we're talking about. And different notes carry different pitches. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is scales. Now, notes can be arranged into different scales and also modes. A series of 12 notes is also known as an octave, and the separation of notes is called a chromatic scale. You have patterns of whole notes and half notes. They make up the scale. I'm going to give you also an example of what we're talking about, and this is the major scale of C. Let's listen. That is actually an example of the C major scale. So going forward, the next topic that we want to touch on very, very briefly is the idea of a chord. What is a chord? A chord is the sounding of 3 or more different notes. When you put 3 or more different notes, that is what's called a chord when you play them all at the same time. Also, you can have something related to a chord, which is called a triad. A triad is the most common type of chords. And also, they come in different forms and names, such as C major or E minor. C major, E minor is an example of 3 notes that are being played together simultaneously in a chord or a triad. Next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is rhythm. Rhythm is the arrangement of sounds and also periods of silence in the time signature. The time signature you will see on a piece of sheet music that will specify how many beats there are in a measure. The next thing that we want to touch on briefly is the idea of melody. A melody is a series of tones sounding in succession. The tones of a melody are typically created with respect to pitch. They come in forms such as scales and musical systems. Melody is typically divided into phrases and a larger overarching structure. The elements of melody are pitch, duration, dynamics, and timbre. I'd like to give you an example of melody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed our lesson today. In conclusion, I would like for you to encourage you to study more about how music works. Music theory is actually the examination of the language and the notation of music. It seeks to identify patterns and structures, and also goes into composers' techniques, also genres and styles of music. Come back for our next lesson. In our next lesson, we will be discussing how to play songs. I'd like for you to pick out 3 songs that you would like to play in the Synthesia software, and I will be giving you 3 demonstrations of how to play songs.